Hello. We're going to talk for just a few minutes about W.E.B. Du Bois. Yes, you do pronounce it that way. I know it looks French, and it probably is French, but that's the way people pronounce that name. W.E.B. Du Bois, as you can see from the presentation that you were assigned to review, excuse me, um, lived from 1868 to 1963. You may wonder why we're reading him in the middle of trying to understand Beloved, which was published in 1987. Souls of Black Folk, which we're looking at um, in the readings, is from right around the turn of the century, around 1903. So we're looking back about 85 years at something that W.E.B. Du Bois wrote, which can help us understand what's happening to the characters in Beloved. Du Bois is famous, really well known for many things, and there's a whole list of those things in the presentation. But one of the most important things that he contributed, besides being an influence on a lot of other young Black people around the time uh, that he was an established academic and writer, he was a kind of a mentor to many young Black people during the Harlem Renaissance, which we'll get to later, which was happening in like the 1930s and 40s. But before that, and we will come back to him when we get to the Harlem Renaissance. Before that, he wrote The Souls of Black Folk, which is just a really important American um, work. And I put a quote in the presentation that says, it's where he describes what it feels like to be Black in America. He says, the Negro is a sort of seventh son, born with a veil and gifted with second sight in this American world, a world which yields him no true self-consciousness, but only lets him see himself through the revelation of the other world. So what he's describing there may be somewhat familiar to you. If you've ever looked in your mirror and thought, ew, you're fat, or ew, you're too short, or whatever problem you have with yourself. Probably you were thinking about yourself through the eyes of other people. As you're looking at yourself in the mirror, you're imagining what other people see when they look at you, and sometimes you don't like it, right? We all can identify with that. That's a little bit of the tension between the ego and the superego, if you've studied that in psychology. The difference between who you are just inside and who you think the world wants you to be. But what Du Bois is describing is a little more intense because, as he suggests, for a Black person living during the period that he's talking about, the difference between what you felt like you were inside and what the world saw when they looked at you was so vast that it caused a kind of inner war. It wasn't just a little bit of self-loathing. It was the sense that you could never be both yourself and American, even if you were born in the US, that you could never be what America thinks of as an American because Black people are defined outside of that. I want to read just a little more of what he says about this. He says, it is a peculiar sensation, this double consciousness, this sense of always looking at oneself through the eyes of others, of measuring one's soul by the tape of a world that looks on in amused contempt and pity. One ever feels his two-ness, an American, a Negro, two souls, two thoughts, two unreconciled strivings, two warring ideals in one dark body, whose dogged strength alone keeps it from being torn asunder. So in articulating this, he helped a lot of people understand what they'd been feeling. And he helped America at large understand how it was keeping Black people in the United States from integrating successfully into American culture, from being part of the American identity. They were expected to be part of the American identity, and yet they were basically told, well, you can't because you're Black. So I think I mentioned this in one of the earlier lectures, but if you think about the example of Paul D, he knows that he's a worthy person a lot of the time. Like he understands that he's strong, that he's reliable, that he is a good, and that he can do a lot with his own hands. And yet he kind of carries around with him this feeling that maybe he's not really a man, that maybe he's only a man if someone, let's say a white slave owner, tells him he's a man, that they sort of own um, the the copyright, I guess, on manhood, and that they can give it to you or they can withhold it from you. That there's not something inherently about him that is male. So he kind of waffles between feeling sometimes like he might just be an animal and that he's really a man. And the same thing happens to Setha. Sometimes she feels like like she's treated like an animal. They measure her like an animal, and so she's kind of constantly confronted with this feeling that maybe she's not quite human. And toward the end of the novel, we see that she's finally beginning maybe the journey toward claiming her humanity. And Paul D really helps her with that. So, on some level, Paul D has always known maybe that he was fully human, but there's just this other part of him that's pulling against that. And DuBois did a lot of things to help America kind of understand the dynamic that it was creating. He was able to put this into words. So, he's an important writer. So I wanted to introduce you to him. He will be on the test, so make sure you've read the part that I assigned to you out of The Souls of Black Folk, and that you think a little bit about how, so I'm going back to the big question about alienation. In what ways can we become alienated from ourselves? In some ways, Paul D and Setha are kind of kept from fulfilling their promise, all the potential that they have, because they're constantly dealing with this inner struggle that's going on. They're spending so much energy doing that that they don't have much energy left to go out in the world and really do something that they might be able to do. And this notion of being alienated from yourself, we might be able to identify with, right? Maybe we still experience that sometimes. And maybe his definition helps us understand some problems in the human condition. All right, so we'll carry on and come to the next topic soon. Thank you.